Human history is a mystery to most. Even the world's greatest experts, archaeologists, anthropologists, and other fact-finders all agree that there are near infinite numbers of historical mysteries from events that still cannot be explained millions of years later, and they likely never will be. One of history's greatest and most recent mysteries occurred on the evening of August 15th, 1977, using the Big Ear, a massive radio telescope at Ohio State University that was the size of 3 football fields. This instrument was used for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence project. Astronomers were scanning the skies at Ohio State when they detected something strange and mysterious coming from a distant region of unknown space. The signal looked exactly like what expert scientists had expected to see from another source of intelligent life: a burst of narrowband signal beamed to a localized region of the sky. Researchers had good reason to believe the signal was real. They were scanning space at 1420.4056 MHz, the same frequency as the hydrogen atom, which, as the building block of life, is the most abundant element in the universe by far. They predicted this frequency was most likely to attract a curious and intelligent civilization who would broadcast a strong signal back. 1977 could have been when such a response was received by the Big Ear. Modern technology could decipher this space signal in seconds, but since this unusual story takes place well before such advanced computing models were available, the signal took a few days to be noticed by a scientist who was reading physical printouts from the machine by hand. He made world history when he circled the band and wrote an exclamation in red ink, which is why the event is now known as the WOW signal. The research team was never able to conclusively pick up another space signal from the mysterious WOW region again. Although they searched the sky for potential sources, there was nothing else in the region that explained the signal. No passing comets, no large stars, only darkness. The SETI program began exploring the great unknowns of space in 1973, and was shut down in late 1977 after more than 20 years. Using what little evidence they have, scientists continue to ponder if one of history's greatest mysteries is even from this world. Seth Shostak, a senior astronomer at the SETI Institute, says that the signal is the biggest and most mysterious space discovery to likely never be solved. Sakafune Ishi, also known as the most enigmatic stone, is one of the greatest unexplained historical mysteries of Japan. The massive granite slab is located on top of a hill in what is today Asuka. Asuka lends its name to the Asuka period in Japanese history, from approximately 552 to 645 CE. The imperial court resided at Asuka during this time, which is perhaps most well known for the introduction of Buddhism into Japan. Today, there are a number of historical relics and rare artifacts discovered in Asuka. Most of these relics are associated with the Empress Saimei, also known throughout history as Empress Kogyoku. Saimei was known throughout history as the rain-making empress. Legend has it that she became a mystical historical figure after she once knelt at the Asuka River to pray for rain and was met with the sound of thunder, followed by a strong precipitation shortly after. Saimei is closely associated with nature, and her tomb remains a popular site for historical pilgrimage. Also associated with Saimei is the Iwafune megalith, an enormous unfinished granite structure more than 15 feet high and 36 feet across. The unexplained monument is thought to have been constructed for her burial, but was later abandoned for unknown reasons. The architecture does not fit Buddhist architecture, and its purpose cannot be explained. But the strangest mystery of all is the Sakafune Ishi ruin, another granite slab more than 18 feet long and 3 feet thick. There are only theories as to its true purpose throughout history. Some stories compare the shapes of the hallows to a sacrifice table, while others have pointed out that the granite grooves are the same angle as the sunset during equinox and solstice events. The site might have been where Empress Saimei performed religious rituals and prayer, like calling for a good harvest. However, the mystery of its greater purpose has been lost to times past, and may never truly be solved. Few of history's mysteries are as strange as the true linguistic phenomenon known as the Great Vowel Shift, which refers to a great change in the English language. Everyone simply began to pronounce words differently over a short period of time. Historians cannot agree on what exactly caused this dramatic shift towards modern language. Before the Great Vowel Shift, the word bite would have been pronounced as beat, mouse as moose, and meat as mate, in what is now known as Middle English. In other words, for some strange and unknown reason, everyone began lifting their tongue at different intervals than before, and no one knows exactly why this happened with such widespread acceptance. Baffled history experts cannot fully agree on any singular reason for the mysterious change in language. Some suggest that the Black Plague, which claimed up to 60% of Europe's total population, could have been the dark historic event that spurred the Great Vowel Shift. The plague caused such a massive loss in population that society and social status changed dramatically. Language could have changed as a result of the different economic classes forced to mingle more than ever before in human history. A mass migration of people getting away from the plague could have caused further merging of regional dialects. Other historians think the Great Vowel Shift was simply a hypercorrection amongst English people in response to the rising popularity of French language. Whatever the case, we have the Great Vowel Shift to thank for the way that we speak today. This story is rather ironic, though. Many of history's mysteries have been solved by translating ancient texts from times past. Yet we still cannot solve this comparatively recent mystery behind our own language. The ancient Greek Empire was remarkably advanced and powerful, and left behind a variety of historic events to serve as the foundation for modern society. Some Greek innovations were so advanced that we've been unable to replicate them despite our best scientific attempts, while others simply are no longer possible to find. One such mystery was the multifactorial use of the powerful plant Silphium, which was a key component in everything from animal feed to medicine. We will never be able to replicate these discoveries because although some plants still bear its name in modern time, Silphium is no longer thought to exist in its truly glorious ancient form. The ancient history of Silphium has many additional uses throughout Greek civilization. It could be cooked and consumed as a vegetable, and its roots were dipped in vinegar and eaten raw. Weird history stories spoke of Silphium-fed goats and sheep having more succulent and tender meat. The flowers of the plant were also used in perfumes, and its dried sap was grated and used as a spice. Ancient rulers thought the plant was worth its weight in silver coins. Julius Caesar reportedly kept 1,500 pounds of Silphium resin in the Roman treasury. It's memorialized throughout history in poetry and in song, and can be found on the majority of coins from ancient Cyrene, the only city where it grew. Located in what is now eastern Libya, Cyrene became massively rich by exporting Silphium, which was native to a narrow strip of land about 25 miles wide and 100 miles long. It was extremely difficult to grow commercially, though why it only seemed to grow here is one of history's mysteries that no one can explain today. This ancient version of Silphium eventually went extinct, likely due to over-harvesting and economic greed. Some have theorized that Silphium could have been a sterile hybrid crossbreed from a rare combination of other plant species. Today, historians are only left with a few drawings of Silphium, including those found on Cyrenian coins. Experts have not been able to identify the original plant, nor have they been able to confirm if its purported properties are fact or myth. However, there are those that believe the mysterious plant may still exist in some remote area of Libya, just waiting to be found by a curious historian who's willing to explore. Ancient human history supposedly extends back more than 5.8 million years, when our primate ancestors began to first walk on two legs. Yet, despite being around for so long, scientists have discovered very little evidence to indicate any complex societies until roughly 60,000 years ago, which is actually very recent in terms of world history. After about 200 or 300,000 years, people suddenly and seemingly out of nowhere began to develop much more complex cultures. This historical event is known as evolution's greatest leap forward, and this unexplained time period remains as one of the greatest historical mysteries ever. 50 to 60,000 years ago is when archaeological discoveries show humans first beginning to wear clothes made of animal hide, burying their loved ones, and creating complex tools like early bows and fishhooks. Anthropologists also found representational art from this famous historical time period. Cave paintings that depict horses, goddesses, and idols. All proof that our ancestors were capable of abstract thought and imagination. Lastly, the arrival of humans in Australia about 65,000 years ago had to mean our ancient ancestors had seafaring vessels and the ability to travel very long distances by this time. Art, tools, and sea travel were all major events that marked a big change in human history and behavior. And today, scientists aren't exactly sure what could have caused these sudden advancements in such a short period of time. That is, assuming that the estimated age of all these artifacts and discoveries is correct. Evidence from the fossil records suggest that the human brain reached a modern size and shape about 100,000 years ago. Yet it was only 60 to 50,000 years ago that our behavior changed drastically. In other words, that means there was roughly 40 to 50,000 years of untold history where we have adapted modern brains and still somehow behaved quite primitively. One strange theory is that there may be a gene which controls language development. It's possible that the language development gene could have taken tens of thousands of years to develop through natural evolution. The ability to communicate with spoken language could have enabled teamwork on a larger scale, leading to a global renaissance of sorts. Ultimately, modern scientists remain baffled and cannot explain the mystery behind this massive behavioral change. Unless a major historical event is discovered to better explain the cultural link, the mystery of this ancient history puzzle may never truly be solved. Falun Gong was a controversial spiritual movement that was formed in 1992 by Li Hongzhi. The sudden prominence of the formation concerned the Chinese government, which branded them as a heretical cult. Li, however, decided to resettle in the US, changing the movement with his departure. Before leaving, though, he published the Zhuan Falun, a 9-part lecture series. Followers were supposed to read and reread the sacred writing to sustain the relationship with the leader. The text stresses some demonic themes, as well as apocalyptic ones. The movement would go on to protest against the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. In 1999, the group was banned, but the followers of Falun Gong continued to promote their case in Western media as a protest for freedom of religion. In 2001, though, some of the adherents in Tiananmen Square convinced the media that the movement was indeed a cult. Subsequently, the group would establish its own media outlets and try to resist what seemed to be a campaign of repression. In 2002, a small group of activists in Changchun devised a plan to hack the state TV. They pulled this stunt by cutting into the cable network and attaching it to portable video equipment. When they succeeded in doing so, they went on to play a video of their teachings. According to the reports, there was a brief blackout, followed by Li Hongzhi appearing on screen and speaking. There were banners saying Falun Dafa is good. Falun Dafa is an alternate name for the movement. One viewer claimed that the interruption lasted as long as 50 minutes, but a local cable company reported that there was only a 10-minute break in the regular transmission. A documentary film, Eternal Spring, was later made and retraces the events of the hijacking and the inner workings of the movement. One of the practitioners explained that the reason they carried out this form of protest was to set the record straight. It's said to tell the story of this group and their determination to speak up for political and religious freedom. After the event, police quickly swept the city in an effort to locate the saboteurs, and hundreds of practitioners were detained. 15 of them were sentenced to terms of up to 20 years. Many of the followers were made to leave China. One of them was the illustrator and comic artist behind the Justice League and the Star Wars franchises. 2 decades later, the illustrator met with other members of the movement who were exiled, one of which was the only TV hijacker to have left China, who went by the name Mr. White. He explained that he was more of a survivor than a key member behind the 2002 takeover of the state television. He had completely disagreed with the hijacking because he believed that it would worsen the violent repression of the movement, which it did. Those imprisoned were said to have suffered torment and violence. The animated short series Looney Tunes was produced by Warner Brothers and began in 1930. Well-known characters were Bugs Bunny, Sylvester, Tweety, Porky Pig, and Daffy Duck. Yosemite Sam, the cowboy character who displays a large hat and long mustache, was introduced as an enemy of Bugs Bunny in the 1945 cartoon Hair Trigger. In December of 2004, not long before Christmas, a signal was heard all across the United States at 3,700 kilohertz. It was a short data burst that was quickly followed by some garbled words. It was being sent every 50 seconds, and other monitors were receiving the signal too. It was first heard on Sunday, the 19th of December, and it was found that the transmission had been bouncing between 4 frequencies, one every 10 seconds from low to high. It was also being transmitted in double sideband mode using the frequencies 3,700, 4,300, 6,500, and 10,500. The garbled speech that was heard was reported to belong to the voice of Yosemite Sam. He was saying, "Varmint, I'm going to blow you to smithereens," from the 1949 Bunker Hill Bunny, Bugs Bunny cartoon. The transmission stopped on the Thursday evening of the 23rd of December, but it didn't cease for long. On the 15th of January in 2005, the transmission returned, this time using a different frequency. The international time frequencies were 10, 15, and 20 megahertz. 3,700 kilohertz had not been a wise choice, since it finds itself in the center of the amateur radio 80 meter band. The use of this frequency attracted the attention of Mark Stark and Mike Langner, 2 licensed radio operators who were living in New Mexico. The garbled speech grew in strength in New Mexico on the 16th of February in 2005. Mike and Mark were armed with a Potomac Field Intensity Meter, a shielded loop antenna, and a mobile rig, and they set out west to figure out where the signals were originating. At 2:30 that afternoon, the two found themselves at a Laguna reservation and heading toward a compound containing towers and antennas. They managed to confirm that this was where the strange broadcasts were coming from. It was the MATIC Center, Mobility Assessment Test and Integration. It formed part of the Laguna Industries Corporation, a Native American business in which the military was developing mobile communications battlefield systems for the United States. The 2 operators didn't go unnoticed, and they began snapping some photos of the buildings and antennas. They were approached by a man who started yelling at them, ordering them to stop taking pictures. The 2 retreated back home, and 3 hours later, the signal that had persisted since the previous year had disappeared. Laguna Industries still existed at the time, but references to MATIC completely vanished from their website in 2011, in an ominous twist. Then, at the end of 2004, the website was checked again, but it was nowhere to be found. Some believe that the transmission was some sort of spy operation, while others think that they were trying to test how long they could run a broadcast before radio operators would pick up on it. One commenter on an article that distributed the story of the Yosemite Sam transmission explained that this wasn't the only signal that had been tracked here. According to him, it had something to do with propagation testing on what he referred to as a black project, a covert undertaking of a military and defense force. This was confirmed by one of the radio operators involved, who stated that the program had been a black government propagation study, and that MATIC aren't informed about what their customers are doing. The system was being controlled out of Fort Wayne, Indiana. KRTV is a television network based in Great Falls, Montana. It makes up part of the Montana Television Network and has stations in Helena, Missoula, Bozeman, Billings, and Butte. On the afternoon of the 11th of February, back in 2013, 5 emergency alert hijackings had taken place. Affected areas were Great Falls, Montana, Marquette, Michigan, La Crosse, Wisconsin, and Portales in New Mexico. Some of the compromised channels included KRTV, WKBT-DT, WBUP, WNMU, and KENW. The KRTV station had its emergency alert system hacked. A message warned of an alleged and impending zombie apocalypse. The first of the hijackings took place between 2:30 and 2:33 p.m. on KRTV channels 2 and 3. WMNU in Marquette and Portales followed shortly after at 3:55 p.m. 5 hours later, at 8:35, WPUP received the same message on their station. At the same time, KRTV2 received their second hijacking of the same hoax. Similarly, the morning show on WIZM-FM in La Crosse made use of the recording of the hoax message along with the host's reaction to the warning. They didn't edit out the same tones, and the broadcast was transmitted into WKBT-DT during a commercial, which triggered the emergency alert system. The following day, the hacker was luckily apprehended. A backdoor attack allowed the person to gain access to the security of the emergency equipment. This was because there'd been insufficient protection of the station equipment, and they'd neglected to change their logins and passwords. The creepy warning began with a sentence that was used in a song by Anthrax called "Fight 'Em Till You Can't." It also went on to say that the message on screen will be updated when more information is available. It was ordered that no one should attempt to approach or apprehend the bodies of the deceased that were rising from their graves, as they were considered to be dangerous. They repeated the same message again before stating that the warning was applicable to anyone who was receiving the broadcast. For viewers to get updated information, they were told to tune in at 9:20 a.m. if they'd become separated from their television, or if the electrical service had been interrupted. It was further explained that the civil authorities in the area had reported that bodies were coming from the graves and attacking the living. The message ended with, "This station will now cease transmission. Please use your battery-powered radio. Tune in to 9:20 a.m. for further information." On some of the channels, the message traveled across the top of the screen in white writing with emergency alert system displayed in the center. Other channels merely had a voiceover. The voice that spoke also sounded rather eerie and certainly instilled fear in the viewers watching. After the incident, KRTV made a statement that the message had not come from their station and that it was the result of a hacker. They were assured that they were looking into the origin of the alert so that they could ensure that a similar event didn't happen again. Local police also confirmed that there was no emergency and that there were no sightings of zombies rising from the ground anywhere in the mentioned areas. According to the Register, some believe that the prank may have been to promote one of the two zombie-related films that were being released at the time. The emergency system hack seemed to top the 2012 incident hack of the highway signs of Portland, Maine, which put out signals reading, "Warning, zombies ahead." Back in 2017, Orange County in Southern California experienced the shock of their lives. The Orange County Register reported that a Lake Forest resident had been watching HGTV on the Cox Communications cable service when a sudden emergency alert flashed on her screen. She managed to report the incident, which showed an emergency alert banner accompanied by a male voice saying, "In the last days, an extremely violent time will come." Spectrum cable customers seemed to receive the same message. Another woman posted the ominous message on YouTube, and soon social media was seeing hundreds of comments about the impending doom prediction. A resident from West Hills was watching a show on Time Warner when it was interrupted by a man speaking of the second coming. Some attributed the warning to the prophecy of a planet on its way to collide with Earth, which is something that scientists assured wouldn't happen. It was also suspected that the message may have come from a well-known evangelical pastor, Chuck Swindoll, who's said to broadcast at 11 a.m. from Orange County. He'd been reciting the last days from a scripture in the Bible, more specifically 2 Timothy 3:1, which states, "You should know this, Timothy, that in the last days there will be very difficult times." No one is certain as to how this message may have landed upon the emergency alert, but it certainly stirred everyone in the county. A Cox spokesperson explained that the end-of-the-world message was probably caused by a hacker hijacking the radio station. But it was also stated that the scary prediction was nothing more than a test for the emergency broadcasting system that had gone terribly wrong. According to one of the spokesmen, this event was part of a standard test that was done via FM radio station KWVE. According to the person, during the test, an emergency tone was used to both start and stop the message, but the end tone allegedly didn't transmit correction. So the radio signal continued for an extra 2 minutes. It was not properly switched off, and so the voice on the program ran into the broadcast. Another spokesperson, Dennis Johnson, this time for Spectrum, revealed that they were being fed an incorrect audio file during the test. A KWVE representative stated that he could not confirm if the alert did in fact originate from the radio station, but that he would certainly look into it. These conflicting excuses, though, just bring about suspicion. Reports of the creepy message soon began to trickle into the web, first appearing on a Reddit discussion group created by Orange County residents. One user explained that it had been one of the most unsettling things that he'd ever heard in his life. He heard eerie music and a man speaking, but his tone was ominous, and due to the bad quality, the viewer was unable to make out what was being said. This out-of-place transmission made many social media users think that the cable systems were being hacked by conspiracy theorists who were trying to instill fear in the masses into thinking that it was the end of the world, or to spread false information about the imaginary planet Nibiru. With so many conflicting conclusions as to what happened here, it's hard to believe that it was a mere error and not something that had been done intentionally. Finding itself almost at the deepest part of the iceberg chart is the "Don't be a chump, vote for Trump" political radio message intrusion. In 2020, hosts of the WEEI-FM 105.5 were chatting about sports when suddenly their signal began to fade. Static blasted over the voices when drivers who were listening to the channel reached the downtown area of Warren, Massachusetts. Through the static, another voice begins to creep in. In a video filmed by one of the drivers who experienced this intrusion, the voice can be heard saying, "Don't be a chump, vote for Trump." There's a bit of a pause before the voice re-enters, repeating the same thing again, except in a whisper this time. According to locals, the message played over and over again for a few days, and even the town's police chief had heard it. Chief Gerald Millett stated that he initially thought that someone had been broadcasting at a frequency close to that frequency. So he began driving around the area and found that it began by Pine and Nelson Street and continued all the way downtown. At Parkview and Southbridge Streets, the signal becomes incredibly clear. Gerald agreed that the signal was best at this intersection, but he couldn't determine exactly where it was coming from, who was doing it, or how it was being done. The first time that he experienced the intrusion, he brushed it off, but then it just carried on happening. He spoke with other officers who'd also been hearing the message, and they began to investigate to determine if any laws had been broken here. The chief explained that if it was being done over the public safety radio, then it would definitely be illegal. He also reached out to the Federal Communications Commission, which would assist him in determining just where the message had originated. A president of the Central Massachusetts Amateur Radio Association, Brian Lavero, explained that broadcasting this message was in violation of the law. He also believes that if the person was caught, they'd be facing a heavy fine. Lavero also said that a radio operator wouldn't be able to do this, but rather someone who had an antenna, some knowledge, and a bit of equipment would. He believes that this is exactly what was happening, since the ominous chants can only be heard in a specific area. The president of the association suggested that the antenna might be in an attic because of the small area that the message is reaching. The FCC would be able to pinpoint exactly where the signal had been coming from. However, it remains undetermined if anything has ever been uncovered in this case. Gerald later confirmed that he'd not received a response from the FCC, and had also tried reaching out to the WEEI, but to no avail. The video of the intrusion circulated the web and was featured on a YouTube channel dedicated specifically to broadcast signal intrusions. This ordeal had taken place during the 2020 United States presidential election. As of 2024, there are no answers as to who may have intercepted the radio station, but it did startle a whole lot of unsuspecting drivers throughout Warren. It was a strange hijacking that took place for those few days. The intrusion revealed how easy it would be for systems to be hacked or disrupted. 2022 was a time of unrest in Iran. It began with the passing of Mahsa Amini, sparking off protests in September, which continued well into 2023. Amini had been involved in previous protests a few days later, in which she and others were against the requirement for women to cover their hair with a hijab. Many uprisings of this nature have taken place before, but never quite as demonstrative compared to the 2022 events. The opposition took many forms, some of which saw women cutting off their hair in solidarity and chanting "Women, Life, Freedom," or street protests, and even hacking live TV broadcasts. On the 8th of October in 2022, the state-run broadcaster in Iran was hacked. A news bulletin was interrupted by a protest against the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. The protest came after an unrest that saw a clash with security forces. Activists disrupted the live broadcast of a meeting between the supreme leader and state officials by airing pictures and messages that supported the continuation of the protests against the leader and the government. Initially, the screen had gone black before a creepy cartoon mask appeared on the screen. The image quickly changed to that of Khamenei engulfed in CGI flames, along with messages and 4 images of protesters. One of the messages had read, quote, "Join us and rise up." Music was blaring in the background, along with an audio clip of protesters chanting the Kurdish anti-government slogan, which translates to "Women, Life, Freedom." The activists called for viewers to get up and accompany them on the streets for the ongoing uprising at the time. Taking credit for this hijacking was the activist group who called themselves Ali's Justice, who called the protest a sweet moment and had even encouraged Twitter users to send them their best memes of the hijacking. The Tasnim news agency confirmed that there was a hack that lasted 12 seconds before it was cut off and was carried out by anti-revolution agents. A spokesperson of the Iran State Radio and Television called the event an act of vandalism and infiltration. Force was used in an attempt to play down the unrest and suppress them. It's uncertain if there were any consequences for the individuals involved in the television hijacking, or if the authorities even know who any of the members of the activist group are. While the large displays have mostly subsided, there are still isolated incidents that are taking place. It also appeared that the broadcast hijacking itself did not have much of an impact aside from being creepy and frightening with its imagery. Modern technological advancements have been able to ensure that these hijackings don't happen too often. However, on the 12th of January in 2017, the cable company C-SPAN had one of its programs randomly switched over to a Russian television network. The program cut to a Russian broadcast with no explanation at all as to why it had done this. The company attributed it to some sort of technical error, but speculators believe otherwise. Some theorists believe that this was Russia's way of interfering in American politics, and that the hack's intention was to reveal the weakness of the security weaknesses. The company maintains that it was likely just someone flipping the wrong switch, but they've yet to provide any proof for such an explanation. After a website headed the event as C-SPAN confirms it was briefly hacked by Russian news site, it corrected itself by saying that no such thing had been confirmed by the company. C-SPAN did, however, say that RT, a Kremlin-funded propaganda channel, had somehow intercepted the network's online feed for a moment. They later explained that the sudden misdirected broadcast was not a nefarious act. The company stated that after some investigation, they found that RT's signal had been routed into the encoder that was feeding C-SPAN 1's signal to the internet, instead of using an unused backup. This, of course, left plenty of room for conspiracy theories. The apparent accidental hijacking occurred at the same time that a Russian spy drama called The Americans was appearing. The Americans is a show that was created by a former CIA officer. The switch came a few hours after a power outage had disrupted a Senate confirmation hearing for Kansas Representative Mike Pompeo to lead the CIA. The cut-in came at the moment that Representative Maxine Waters was speaking. On the screen, there was writing referring to a San Escobar Twitter account, followed by images from the account, one of which said, quote, "The flag of freedom, the flag of progress, the flag of the people, the flag of the Democratic People's Republic of San Escobar." More images spoke of a place called San Escobar, which is said to be a dreamy nation that was accidentally founded by Poland, but no country by that name actually exists. It appears that the fake country got a promotion through the interception of C-SPAN's signal. The place was brought up by the Polish foreign minister, who explained that he'd been on a plane for 22 hours, and the Spanish name, San Cristobal y Nieves, may have jumped into his head during the speech, subsequently leading him to saying, quote, "with countries such as Belize or San Escobar." Twitter had jumped onto the error and made all sorts of jokes and memes, hence the Twitter images and alleged official account for the place. RT, the Russian-owned network, however, haven't said anything about the accidental hijacking that took place, which only led theorists to become even more suspicious. A spokesperson for C-SPAN stated that the website had been replaced for about 10 minutes. The representative who was speaking at the time, Maxine Waters, found the timing of the sudden hijacking to be strange. She said that it came at a time when the intelligence agencies were confident and confirmed that Russia had hacked the DNC. Waters had been speaking about Trump and Russia when the interference occurred. A report accused RT of collaborating with WikiLeaks to discredit the United States. Coast to Coast AM refers to an American radio talk show that discusses various topics, including the paranormal and conspiracy theories. One of the hosts was Art Bell, who was known for his strange upbringing and his political views, as well as his stance on alien life. It was on the 11th of September in 1997 that Coast to Coast's phone lines were open and unscreened, with one line being reserved for callers who had some inside information about the alien base that is believed to be holding UFOs, Area 51. Bell was fielding calls for a few hours when something strange happened midway. A frantic caller, who had become known as the Area 51 caller, had greeted the host through tears and stated that he didn't have much time. The caller stuttered through his sentences and revealed that he was a former employee at the base who was let go on medical discharge 1 week prior. Bell requested that he give them information quickly, after the caller suggested that the CIA would be triangulating on their position. He told the host that aliens were extra-dimensional beings. According to him, the aliens had infiltrated a lot of aspects of the military, such as Area 51. The government allegedly knows about these beings as well. The caller mentioned that there were many safe areas that citizens could be moved to, and the reason this wasn't happening was that the government wanted much of the population wiped out, so that those who remained would be easier to control. It was at this point that the audio began to drop out suddenly before completely cutting off. The sobs of the man can be heard again, but the signal keeps dropping and cutting out, which has never happened on the show before. The nationwide audience could hear some backup programming on the radios, which is presumed to be Bell rushing to get back on the air. When he did manage to establish a connection, he stated that they were now running on a backup system. The host revealed that the entire transmitting system had gone down after an alleged massive transmission failure. He wondered if they'd been zapped in some way by the government or another entity that didn't want them speaking of what the caller had been alleging. This left listeners wondering if it had just been a coincidence that one of the strangest calls had occurred at a time of a loss of broadcasting power. Some thought that it may have even been a prank with just the right amount of timing, while theorists suggested that a greater being was behind it all. The next year, on the 28th of April in 1998, the caller called back, saying that his name was Brian, but not everyone is convinced that this is the same individual that called in the year prior, whereas others think it was him, but he was forced to make his previous calls seem fake. He told Bell that he was the Area 51 caller, and explained that the whole thing was a prank. The host asked him how it was possible to time the signal outage with the prank, but the caller had no idea. Brian said that it scared him when the signal suddenly dropped that evening. He also alleged that he'd been calling on a special line, trying out various characters, the Area 51 caller being one of them. Bell alleged that his call even took down his satellite, to which the caller's response was that the information he was giving must have been somehow correct and intercepted by the government. The man then asked how he could prove that he was the first caller, and the only way was to give the show more about what he had said the previous time. It was then that he jumped back into the same character as the last call, sobbing and sounding afraid. But some remain skeptical and have compared both audios alongside each other, pointing out the various differences. Somehow, Brian's initial call had sparked the failure of a transmission, or even an intrusion by another force. The event remains a persistent mystery, and no one is quite certain what to make of it. Back in 2019, the Weather Channel, one of the trusted cable networks for meteorological data across the United States, was suddenly knocked right off the air. It had been airing the AMHQ show that started that morning at 6. The live broadcast would be affected for at least 90 minutes, and it was resumed through the backup systems while the network sought out the error. They soon discovered that it was not just a standard technical error that one would expect, but rather a malicious software attack. The channel took to their Twitter feed, confirming that they'd experienced the attack this morning. It's believed that in this case, it was a ransomware attack. Ransomware is malicious software that's been designed to block access to a system until money has been paid. Generally, this form of hijacking is directed at individuals and not businesses, let alone a weather channel. During the time that they were off the air, viewers watched a taped program, Heavy Rescue 401, until AMHQ returned at 7:39 a.m. with a commercial before the anchors announced the reason for their sudden absence. Jim Cantor, one of the anchors, stated that the Weather Channel had been the victim of some sort of malicious attack, with Stephanie Abrams adding that it affected their ability to air the weather information. Abrams then jumped to the weather, which was said to be of severe prediction. Joseph Carson, the chief security scientist at Thycotic, explained that details of the cyber attack were limited, but it appeared to impact the company's ability to broadcast the live weather show. But a backup system allowed them to resume. He also wondered if this act had a connection to the string of malicious malware that had been plaguing other organizations, including the Locker Goga ransomware that impacted Norsk Hydro just a few weeks prior. This incident didn't evade conspiracy theorists either, with some blaming the event on a person who may have attributed the bad weather to the Weather Channel itself. Others suggested that Russia was somehow involved. It's more likely that this was not a targeted but rather a phishing attack. The incident was placed under investigation by the FBI, and it's still uncertain as to how the perpetrators were able to infect the system and compromise the network. Of course, some had found the bright side of the attack, and many memes were distributed on Twitter. One of them was made by John Peck, who responded to the Weather Channel's post about the ransomware attack. Peck stated that they should have hosted in the cloud. Another Twitter user directed his message at whoever carried out the attack, saying, quote, "You've got a big storm coming." It was never determined if the person or people responsible for the situation were ever caught, but the Weather Channel most likely added some more security measures to their system to ensure that something like this didn't happen again. Many people wondered why anyone would want to hijack a weather channel, but hijacking Wedding Central might be even weirder. The cable channel began on the 18th of August in 2009 and was created by Rainbow Media Networks. On the 10th of September in 2010, Wedding Central was airing an episode of the show Bridezillas at about 4 that afternoon. The intrusion was also quite loud, and many of the videos came with an audio warning. This intrusion was certainly one of the more creepy ones that left the viewers shocked and terrified. Some thought it was a broadcast signal intrusion or another entity. Bridezillas is a reality TV show that centers around women who refer to as normal before their wedding until they realize the costs involved in wedding planning, which leads to dramatic and nightmarish scenes. But in the end, it appears to have all been worth it after getting the perfect wedding they had dreamed of. It's one of the most regular shows, which is why it's so strange that it was subject to a hijacking or intrusion. The clip begins with the couple walking hand in hand as the planning begins. A woman, supposedly the bride, can be heard in the background narrating that her biggest fear is that her wedding dress doesn't fit. Women can be seen in a room, and one of them brings the wedding dress to the bride to try on. Upon revealing her outfit, the show becomes eerily distorted before a strange clicking sound can be heard. After that, a really loud noise follows that sounds like garbled speech, and then the clicking resumes. The distorted pixels then begin to take the shape of a man before cutting to a shadowy figure with a creepy smiling face. It looked as though it was being filmed from the bottom up toward the sky. The top of a tree can be seen beside the head of the shadowy figure. The strange noises were enough to freak the viewers out, but the creepy shadow man was probably what terrified them. The figure stays on the screen for a few seconds along with the eerie sound before glitching back to the reality show. It was still distorted for a few moments before the picture became clear once more. After the clip found its way onto YouTube, many reported that it was scarier than most broadcast hijackings. The situation was immediately brought to the network's attention, but no physical transmission sources were ever found. The network assumed that this occurrence had been nothing more than a simple glitch coming from a different station. But what kind of station would be airing such a creepy video? It was never confirmed if any investigation had taken place thereafter, or what the outcome was, but it definitely left the viewers traumatized and confused. Many even reportedly had nightmares following the incident. The Anglo-Zanzibar War that took place in 1869 is not known to many due to the weird fact that it was the shortest war ever fought in history, lasting a total of 38 minutes. It all started with the signing of the Heligoland-Zanzibar Treaty between Germany and Britain in 1890. The treaty assigned spheres of influence between the imperial powers in East Africa and saw Zanzibar cede to British influence, while Germany was given control of the Tanzanian mainland. Britain decided to declare Zanzibar a protectorate of the British Empire and employed their own sultan to rule over the region. That position was given to Hamad bin Thuwaini in 1893, and he would remain in power for just over 3 years. But on the 25th of August, 1896, he suddenly passed away inside his palace. Though it's not certain what exactly caused his demise, it's widely believed that his cousin, Khalid bin Bargash, had poisoned him. A few hours later, Khalid had moved into the palace and assumed the position of sultan for himself without British approval. This caught the attention of the Brits, and their chief diplomat, Basil Cave, demanded that Khalid stand down. But he ignored their demands and decided to gather his forces around the palace. His army was well armed with weapons that included firearms and cannons that had been gifted to the former sultan by diplomats over the preceding years. By the 25th of August, Khalid had amassed an army of over 3,000 men, several artillery weapons, and an armed royal yacht, which was moored in the nearby harbor. But simultaneously, the British had anchored 2 ships in the same harbor, and troops were making their way ashore. This was done to protect the British consulate and to keep the local people from rioting. That same evening, another ship entered the harbor as reinforcement, followed by 2 more the next day. Khalid was given one more warning, but he replied that he didn't believe the British would open fire on him, and so at 9 a.m. on the 27th of August, they did just that. 2 minutes later, most of Khalid's artillery had been destroyed, and the palace had started to collapse with 3,000 men still inside. By 9:40, Khalid had surrendered, and the shortest war in history had come to an end. The weird historical mystery of a man named Charles Jameson started in February of 1945 when a man was brought by ambulance to the entrance of Boston's U.S. Public Health Service hospital. The man was of middle age and unconscious, and he was in such poor condition that he was immediately admitted. When an attending nurse asked the ambulance driver for the man's name, he gave it as Charles Jameson and stated that he knew nothing more about the patient. He then climbed back into the ambulance, and neither he nor the ambulance was ever seen or heard from again. At first, medical staff were uncertain if Jameson would survive, as he was suffering from a bone marrow infection of osteomyelitis. They found sores covering his body and noticed that he had scars on his back, likely caused by shrapnel. After a few weeks of treatment, he started to recover. However, the infection had left him paralyzed from the waist down. His speech was completely unintelligible, and to compound matters, he had amnesia and so was unable to explain what had happened to him. Authorities tried to determine the man's true identity, but he had no papers on him and his clothes contained no labels or laundry marks. No one ever called the hospital to ask for him, and none of Boston's ambulance services had any records of an ambulance being dispensed to that hospital on that day. A theory arose that Jameson had been aboard a freighter that had been sunk by a German submarine, but that was never verified. When his fingerprints were sent to the FBI and the military, both replied that they had no record of him. His photo was distributed to missing person bureaus across the country, but this also yielded no results. In 1953, the hospital's new director, Oliver C. Williams, devised a game that allowed him to communicate with the man. By these means, he was able to learn that Jameson was from London and that he lived in a grey house. He had no living relatives but stated that he had served on a secret convoy in the British Navy. He refused to give any more information on his wartime duties. Many more efforts were made to discover his true identity, but he would eventually pass away in January of 1975 in the same hospital, still unidentified and named by one of his fellow patients as the Unknown Soldier. The scary historical case of the disappearance of a woman called Renee McRae is currently the longest running of its kind in the history of the United Kingdom. Renee lived in Inverness in the Scottish Highlands, and she was separated from her husband, Gordon. On the 12th of November, 1976, she left her house in Cradlehall and dropped her eldest son, Gordon, off at her estranged husband's house. She then traveled south on the A9 as she was planning to visit her sister in Kilmarnock. Later that same night, a train driver spotted her BMW 12 miles away in an isolated lay-by, and he informed police. When her vehicle was inspected, it was found to be charred and empty, except for a rug containing biological matter that matched Renee's. One of the largest and most intensive searches in the history of Scotland was launched, but no trace of Renee was ever found. Witnesses on the A9 described seeing a man dragging something that they thought was a sheep not far from the car, and it would later be discovered that Renee had been wearing a sheepskin coat at the time of her disappearance. Police also received reports of a suspicious man with a pushchair seen nearby. As police investigated her life, they found that Renee had started an affair with a man named William McDowell in 1971, and that he was an employee of Gordon's. McDowell would admit to the affair, but denied any involvement in her disappearance. It was concluded that Renee's life had likely been ended, and although a suspect was identified in 2006, there was insufficient evidence to proceed to court. On the 11th of September 2019, 77-year-old McDowell was arrested for the crime. However, in June of 2021, it was discovered that he may not be fit to stand trial, and the case is still ongoing. Renee's whereabouts are still unknown, and it seems unlikely that we will ever learn what her fate was. Charles Delaney Bravo was a British lawyer who married a wealthy woman named Florence on the 7th of December 1875, when he was still an up-and-coming barrister. Florence had previously been married to Alexander Louis Ricardo, but she had separated from him after discovering that he'd been having extramarital affairs and due to his violent alcoholism. Florence had been having an affair with the much older Dr. James Gully, who was also married, and hence she fell out of favor with her family and society in general. When she met Bravo, however, she terminated the affair. But from the beginning of their marriage, Bravo was a controlling, mean, and violent man towards his new wife, after she had decided to hold on to her own money, which had only been allowed since 1870. This led to tensions in the marriage, which was not off to a good start. 4 months into the marriage, Florence had been suffering from a chronic illness, and Bravo had been treating himself with laudanum for a toothache. One night before going to bed, it's believed that he accidentally swallowed some of the medication and mistakenly took tartar emetic, which is a form of antimony, believing it to be true emetic, which would have helped him expel the opiate from his system. For the next 3 days, Bravo suffered from excruciating pain, but refused to tell police who had poisoned him. It would later be found that he had been slowly poisoning Florence with the antimony, explaining her chronic illness, and Bravo's fate was sealed when he mistakenly ingested it. This explains why he never named his killer, as there wasn't one. But many other theories were suggested, and 2 inquests were held, the details of which were considered to be so scandalous that women and children were ordered out of the courtroom while Florence testified. The first inquest ended in an open verdict, while the second returned a verdict of willful murder. No one was ever arrested, however, and the Bravo household broke up shortly after. Florence moved to Southsea in Hampshire, and she passed away 2 years later at the age of 33, ironically due to alcohol poisoning. Louis Le Prince was a French artist who mysteriously disappeared on the 16th of September, 1890. He was the inventor of an early motion picture camera and was possibly the very first person to film a moving picture sequence, and hence has been dubbed the father of cinematography. In September of 1890, Le Prince was getting ready for a trip to the US, where he would be premiering his new work, accompanied by his wife and children. Before embarking, however, he decided to visit his brother in Dijon, France, and following that, took a train to Paris on the 16th. But he had taken a later train than planned, and his friends were due to meet him in Paris, but missed him. He was never seen or heard from again. The last person to see him was his brother, who saw him at the Dijon station. The French police, Scotland Yard, and his family took part in exhaustive searches, but no traces of him was ever found. In 2003, however, a photograph was discovered of a man who strongly resembled Le Prince, who was found deceased in a nearby river. It was never confirmed whether this was in fact Le Prince. But before the discovery was made, many theories were considered as to what happened to him. Some people believe that due to a patent dispute, his life was ended by Thomas Edison, who was also working on his own motion picture camera at the time. Another theory proposed that Le Prince disappeared of his own free will, and that he had been struggling financially. The following year, it was suggested that Le Prince had never boarded the train in Dijon, and that his life had been ended by his brother. He added that if he wanted to disappear, he could have done so at any time, leading him to the conclusion that his life was in fact ended. In 1977, a note shown to the director of the Dijon Municipal Library claimed that Le Prince had passed away in Chicago after he'd moved there at his family's request when they discovered that he was a homosexual. The last known remaining film from Le Prince's single-lens camera is a sequence showing his son, Adolphe, playing a diatonic button accordion. As for Le Prince's fate, it remains a weird mystery lost to history. When it comes to scary history, the US is at the top of the list. Deep in the Nevada desert lay the Nellis Air Force Range, a 680 square mile area that was used by the US Army to conduct testing. Between 1951 and 1992, the Nellis Air Force Range was the main hub for testing nuclear weapons. As the Cold War loomed over the West, the US wanted to be prepared for anything, leading the way to some of the creepiest photos ever taken. Between 51 and 92, the US Army conducted 1,021 tests at the Nellis Air Force Range, with most of these being underground. However, the Army also wanted to see how their weapons would affect those above ground. The US Army set about building shelters and other public structures to analyze later. They also built houses to the specifications of traditional Soviet housing blocks and traditional suburban American houses to measure the effects. These houses may have looked exactly the same on the outside. However, inside, different materials were used and different layouts were trialed to see what effect, if any, this had. Inside these model homes, the US Army placed mannequins, since they, of course, were not able to use living test subjects. The photos of these mannequins in the houses are some of the creepiest photos in history. The mannequins were posed to look like a real family. Some would be sat in the living room around the radio, adding an eerie feel to the photos. The US Army divided these homes into mini towns, with lawns preened and mannequins in every house. The US Army even added cars complete with mannequins who just visited the department store. Other families were positioned in the basement and others in safe spaces. Each group of mannequins would be wearing different types of clothing and different materials. The US was determined to study every single factor possible. They also wanted to look for ways that citizens could protect themselves on a daily basis, and also what effect radiation would have on buildings for years to come. These photographs of these models are a scary reminder of our history. On December 11, 1945, Chicago police entered the apartment of Frances Brown after a neighbor had called them stating that her radio was playing loudly and her front door had been left open. As they walked inside, they found her body along with a creepy note written in lipstick on the wall. The note read, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." They also found a fingerprint on a door handle that was smudged in lipstick. The note was photographed and labeled as evidence, and the creepy photo would later be released to the public in an appeal for help, giving way to one of the scariest photos in history. Brown was the second victim of a man known as the Chicago Lipstick Killer. A few months before Frances Brown was discovered, 43-year-old Josephine Ross was found in her apartment under similar circumstances, and by this point, Chicago police were beginning to worry. Police were now hunting for their suspect, searching through records and following up every possible lead. Despite their diligence, their suspect would be responsible for one more crime before they were able to capture him. The elusive suspect kidnapped a woman and wrote a letter demanding a ransom. The note read, "Get $20,000 ready and wait for word. Do not notify FBI or police. Bills in 5s and 10s." On the back of this note, they found a fingerprint and were able to analyze it. It took the Chicago police almost a year, but on June 26, 1945, they arrested William Herons in connection with the crimes. At first, he denied any involvement. However, by the 5th day of the interrogation, William confessed to everything. He told officers that his alter ego, George Merman, was actually responsible. The handwriting found at the scene in lipstick was never conclusively matched to William. However, officers claim that fingerprints found at the scene did. To this day, there are doubts as to whether William was truly responsible, as the original manuscripts from the interrogation have since been lost. The handwriting analysis never conclusively proved it was him, but the photograph of the lipstick handwriting will certainly go down as one of the creepiest photos in history. In 1959, Soviet doctor Vladimir Demikhov and his team of scientists made world news when they revealed their newest scientific breakthrough. After performing 23 surgeries, Demikhov was pleased to announce to the world that on the 24th surgery, he had successfully created a two-headed dog. Their invention was immortalized in an edition of Life magazine that ran a full article about them. Demikhov was a pioneer of transplantology, and the Soviet government had sanctioned him to do research into organ transplantations. Demikhov worked tirelessly and successfully transplanted vital organs between dogs, hoping that his research would soon translate to humans. Demikhov was met with some pushback from the Soviet people. However, his research continued, and he's largely credited for being one of the driving forces behind modern human organ transplantation today. Despite his many achievements, Demikhov wasn't content and wanted to take things one step further. So he put into motion the plans to create a two-headed dog by transplanting the head of a smaller dog onto the body of another dog. For his experiment, he chose a German shepherd named Brodiaga, who he would use as the main body, and for the head that was being transplanted, he used a smaller dog named Shavka. Shavka's head and neck were transplanted and attached together using a vascular reconstruction to provide blood flow. The operation took just over 3.5 hours, and Demikhov and his team deemed it a success. Once both dogs had woken up, they were able to hear, see, smell, and swallow. The operation was only successful for 4 days, after which both dogs passed away. However, scientists are hopeful that successful head transplantation could be right around the corner by using Demikhov's methods and modern medicine and technology. 39-year-old Robert Overaker from Camarillo, California, loved an adventure and was always seeking the next big thrill. So on October 1st, 1995, he decided that he wanted to ride over Niagara Falls on a single jet ski. Overaker wanted to take on the Horseshoe Falls, despite the pleas from friends and family. He believed he could take on the falls and win, but sadly that was not the case, leaving us with a creepy moment in recent history. On October 1st, 1995, Overaker set off in the Niagara River and headed upstream toward the edge of the falls. He believed that that day would put him in the history books forever, but little did he know that it would be for all the wrong reasons. As he approached the brink, he set off a rocket that he had rigged up to deploy a parachute. It seems that he was planning to release the jet ski and let the parachute do its job, landing him safely in the water below. Unfortunately, the parachute was not connected properly to his body, and the parachute slipped away from him. Overaker had not packed his parachute before the stunt and was completely unaware of any faults. The exact moment that Overaker went over the falls was caught on camera by Egyptian tourist Amr Hassan. Hassan told newspapers that he'd set up an old-fashioned camera on the banks of the falls to document his trip. However, he unknowingly captured the eerie last moments of Robert Overaker. Hassan wasn't the only one to witness the incident. According to the Niagara Falls Info website, Overaker's stepbrother and friend both witnessed it as well. His last moments are now immortalized in film. He had set out on the Daredevil Challenge in order to raise awareness for the homeless, according to one article. What started out as a day to raise awareness and get his adrenaline pumping ended in heartbreak for the Overaker family as he became the 15th person to intentionally go over the Niagara Falls. On May 18, 2020, Washington stood in silence as they observed the 40th anniversary of the Mount St. Helens eruption. On that day 40 years ago, Mount St. Helens erupted at 8:32 a.m., sending plumes of ash, steam, and rocks down towards southwest Washington. On the morning of May 18th, an earthquake registering 5.1 on the Richter scale hit Washington, causing Mount St. Helens to erupt. Not only did it erupt, but the entire north flank collapsed and caused the largest landslide in history. Hot, thick plumes of smoke were sent cascading down to the towns below, and the eruption had even flattened 230 square miles of forest. Anyone who was in the immediate area did not survive. In total, 57 people lost their lives that day, and thousands of others lost their homes and their businesses. Houses were destroyed, businesses had been torn down, and residents of Washington were ordered to wear face masks as the winds had blown the billowing smoke 250 miles away, casting the city into darkness. Scientists estimate that at least 520 million tons of smoke and ash were spread across the US as a result of the eruption and winds. In the ensuing chaos, one man managed to capture the eruption. What would otherwise be a picturesque backdrop is now associated with one of the scariest moments in US history. In the photo, there's a red Ford Pinto with a motorcycle attached to the back. However, this photo takes an eerie turn when you look up and see the eruption in the distance. Journalists have attempted to track down the man they believe is responsible for the photo, Richard Lasher. However, no one has been successful in doing so. According to Lasher's neighbor, Gary Cooper, on the morning of May 18th, Lasher took his red Ford Pinto and his vintage bike and made his way up to Spirit Lake. Lasher was still driving towards Spirit Lake when he saw Mount St. Helens erupt. According to Cooper, he was incredibly lucky that day. Lasher had actually overslept and had only made it part of the way there. Had he woken up on time, his story would have been very different. Spirit Lake was one of the most affected areas, but according to Cooper, Lasher made it out alive and with a creepy historical photograph in hand. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.